Assalamu alaikum, dear viewers. Welcome to this session of our Islam Study Circle. We will discuss a Quranic verse and then we'll go on to discuss a hadith and then, of course, a Bible verse. The Quranic verse that I have selected is verse 45 of Surah Ankabut. And let me read out the text of this surah, of this verse before you, and also its translation. So the words are وَأَقِمِ الصَّلَاةَ إِنَّ الصَّلَاةَ تَنْهَى عَنِ الْفَحْشَاءِ وَالْمُنْكَرِ. And be diligent in the prayer, because it deters people from lewdness and evil. So you can clearly see that this is a very important guidance, and it tells us that one of the objectives of the prayer and one of the utilities of the prayer is that it wards off evil and also is instrumental in stopping us, in deterring us from going into lewdness and other vulgar acts. So one of the most important things that we need to realize here is that first we have to be very, very diligent in the prayer. And when we say we have to be diligent in the prayer, of course, it means that we have to be regular in our prayers. We have to know what we are reading in the prayer so that we have enough attention and devotion in the prayer, and we are able to concentrate more. And the more we concentrate on our prayer, the more our God connection will be strong. So we have discussed this a number of times that the worship rituals, one of the areas in these, especially the prayer, specifically works on is that it is an expression of thanksgiving to the Almighty for His favors, for His gifts, for His blessings. And therefore, when we pray to the Almighty, we acknowledge these favors. And clearly, when we acknowledge these favors, it is a very small acknowledgement. Otherwise, the favors and blessings of God, they abound. They are unfathomable. And in the absence of any such thing, we of course cannot say that we have actually fulfilled the right of this blessing, of these blessings which the Almighty has showered upon us. So it's just a very small token of the fact that we do acknowledge the Almighty as our Creator and a person and someone who has blessed us with so many gifts and with so many blessings. And we also need to understand that when we thank someone in our own lives, it's a very, very natural and a very forthright attitude that springs from us. Because you see, when someone does a favor to us, we immediately say thank you to him or her. And this is like acknowledging that. And the urge which arises in us is that we would like to repay that person. So whenever we get the chance to repay a gift, we try to repay that gift in even a better manner. So you see, between human interaction, this thanksgiving, this gratitude, acknowledgement already exists. We just need to realize that this gratitude acknowledgement must also exist between ourselves and our Creator, because the amount of blessings that He has showered upon us are immense. And as one of the Quranic verses says, وَإِن تَعُدُّوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ لَا تُحْصُوهَا. If you start counting the favors of the Almighty, you'll not be able to actually enumerate them. You'll not be able to count them. So these innumerable favors do entail that as a small token of this acknowledgement, we put our heads to the floor, we prostrate before the Almighty, and we acknowledge the fact that we are people who are given to the Almighty, who are humble before the Almighty, we are people who are not arrogant, we are people who are thankful, even when the going gets tough, even when we fast through various problems, even when we are facing difficulties in life. We have to show this gratitude. We have to be thankful to the Almighty, because the amount of blessings that He has showered upon us are immense. And we must also remember that at times difficult and calamitous situations make us come closer to the Almighty. We feel stronger than before. And one of the reasons that we are made to pass through such tests are that we become stronger from inside. We become closer to the Almighty. We are given an opportunity. We are actually given an opportunity to come closer to God, and in this way make ourselves more God conscious, more strong, and more sturdy in matters of morality. The other thing which this verse actually stresses, and as you can see, it goes on to say, is that the prayer is something which wards off evil and also lewdness. So the prayer is something which is instrumental actually. It is actually instrumental in stopping us from these evil acts, from indulging in vulgarity. It's much like, its role is much like that of our own conscience. Just as when we do something bad, our conscience prods us, our conscience stops us. In a very similar way, when we stand before the Almighty and we have just done something bad, we immediately realize that and we feel ashamed of what we have done. So it's like being told that when you are living a life of a person who has submitted to the Almighty, of course we cannot lead sinless lives, and this is something which comes to us naturally as human beings. But as far as possible, we have to realize that we are individuals, we are weak individuals who can err, who can stumble, and it is the Lord, it is our God who takes care of us, and we have to rise after every fall. We have to get up after every fall and realize that as human beings, we might do something wrong, but as I always say, that it's not much as the sin, as the attitude after our sin that counts. All of us are prone to these mistakes. We are prone to shortcomings. But the thing is that we have to realize that once we realize what our mistakes are, we have to get over with them and we have to rectify the situation. So the prayer, as this beautiful Quranic verse tells us, that it's one of the means of stopping us from doing evil, of indulging in vulgarity. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ has at one time actually compared the prayer to being washed in water. So when someone asked regarding this particular aspect of the prayer, he told people that it washes our sins. And he says this is much like if you have a bath in a stream which runs near your house 5 times a day. Will you not get rid of the filth which is on your body? Of course we will. So he said that in a similar way, if we read the prayer, if we offer the prayer with full understanding, with depth, with concentration, we are bound to actually be forgiven for the sins that we did between two particular prayers. But of course, this does not mean that every single sin would be forgiven. This particular area relates to sins which relate to perhaps those minor sins or those shortcomings that we did as far as fulfilling the obligations of the Almighty are concerned. However, if we have made a mistake in which we have wronged someone, if we have actually been unjust to someone, then unless we remedy the situation, unless we remedify, unless we atone for this, the Almighty has made it very clear that His forgiveness would not be sufficient. The person who we have wronged, the person whom we have been unjust to, must also forgive us. And dear viewers, we have to realize that if we have to have this strength in our prayer, that it really stops us from evil, it really stops us from doing these bad things, then we have to be a very punctual person. We have to concentrate in our prayer. We have to actually make it a focal point in our lives. These 5 prayers, they hardly take about 20-25 minutes of our day. And if we are able to make this elaborate arrangement that every time before the prayer we gather our wits, we gather our mind, we focus on the fact that we are now coming before the Lord of the worlds, and we have to be extremely attentive and also very respectful, because we are now entering in an arena, we are now entering in the presence of the Lord of the worlds, who has created us, who has actually blessed us, who has been merciful to us, who has been kind, compassionate, and gracious to us. So this actually builds up, and I always have this tip given that it is always best to leave work about a couple of minutes before we intend to offer the prayer, so that we are able to gather our thoughts, so that we are able to concentrate that we are now going to do something different from what we are doing. So we need to realize that praying to the Almighty is the culmination of this attitude of thanksgiving. And when we actually prostrate before the Almighty, when we bow down in prostration, we put our forehead, the highest point of our body, on the ground and acknowledge that He is the Creator and we are the created. He is great and we are humble and frail. We need His support. We need to acknowledge this. And when we are arrogant and when we don't show humility, we are actually overrunning this, and we are actually infringing upon this and not realizing the fact that only God has this attribute, that He is mutakabbir, He is great, He is someone who has the authority, and He is someone who can have this feeling of superiority in him. But as far as we are concerned, all of us are weaklings, we are earthlings, we are frail, and we have to realize this. And as we always discuss, that prayer is something which has to be the focal point of our daily routine. A believer, when he gets up, he or she needs to program his or her day in a manner in which he knows and she knows when the various prayers are going to come in that day, and how he or she is going to offer them, so that our starting point of the day it begins with this thankful attitude and this fact that we are concentrating ourselves towards the Almighty. And also when we go off to bed at night, just before that, when we offer our last prayer, that too is something that we need to acknowledge. And let me also just point out the fact that besides these obligatory prayers that we do offer, which are very brief, the greatest optional prayer, as we have been told, is the tahajjud prayer. And if we are able to make arrangements, if we are able to get up before Fajr, not every day, maybe once a week, maybe once a month or twice a month, and pray to the Almighty, we are told that this is the time in which the Almighty specially focuses His attention on us. And He actually, as there's a hadith which says that He actually calls out, is there anyone who would like to fulfill any of His prayers? Is there anyone who would like to be forgiven? So it's like the Almighty calling out us in that dark of the night. And if we are able to conquer our sleep, because it's very difficult to get up at that time, we are, of course, someone who are very lucky, and we would be in the presence of the Almighty. Viewers, now let us go on to the next part of our study circle, and this is the hadith of the day. This hadith has been taken from the Al-Jami' al-Sahih of Imam Muslim, and let me just read out the words before you and also translate it, and then we'll have a short discussion. So it says, عن عبد الله بن مسعود قال قال رسول الله يقول قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لا حسد إلا في اثنتين رجل آتاه الله مالا فسلطه على هلكته في الحق ورجل آتاه الله حكمة فهو يقضي بها ويعلمها. Again, pearls of wisdom. Abdullah ibn Masud says that God's messenger said, only two people are worthy of envy: a person whom God has given wealth and he went about spending it for the cause of the truth, and a person whom God blessed with wisdom and he decided the affairs of people through it and taught it to them. So viewers, you can see that these are very, very moving guidelines, and some things that we need in our everyday routine. You see that human beings, they always have this feeling of envy and jealousy, and of course they yearn and they do get frustrated at times and also disappointed. But the Almighty here actually, through the Prophet, of course the Prophet is now speaking to us and telling us the ways of life that we need to to spend our lives in. He says that if there is anyone with whom you can be really jealous of, with whom you can really feel envy, there are two people. One of them is that the Almighty has given that person sufficient wealth and he spends that wealth for the cause of God. And a person who has been blessed by hikmah, by wisdom, and he actually uses that wisdom for the cause of people and also teaches them this. So this is a manner in which the Prophet has actually directed our attention, that these two people are very, very special people. They are very coveted. And this coveted nature of their life needs to be understood, that they are people who have been blessed with wealth, but instead of using this wealth for their own cause, instead of being selfish, instead of being self-centered, what they do is they spend this wealth for the cause of the people around them. They do not withhold wealth. They actually don't hoard wealth. They don't amass wealth. They spend it for the people who are around them. And as I said, this is something which is a very, very commendable thing. And I think that one of the areas in which we need to concentrate more is that we have to work out a strategy in life after which we will feel content with what we have, and then whatever remains, we always make it a point to expend it or on worthy causes. And if we study the Quran, one of the guidelines that we get and that we can interpret from the Quran is that if we are able to have enough wealth which is sufficient for our present needs and for our future needs, whether they are personal or business oriented, then this is sufficient for a lifetime. If this state has been attained, then a person should feel content. And if he earns something more, or if he has something more, or the time that he has, he must devote it for the cause of God. So being content is a prerequisite to being charitable. If we are content, we would be able to spend what we have besides our personal needs, besides our business needs, whether they belong to current times or future times. We will always regard it to be something which the Almighty has given us. He has in fact entrusted us. So therefore we must be very careful in this regard. We must chalk out a strategy in which we make ourselves we give ourselves this target in life, that when our needs are fulfilled, we will, if we get money after that, if we earn money after that, or if we get some bonuses after that, we will use them for the cause of God. We will not hoard it for ourselves. We are not going to be selfish in this regard, because we have got what we wanted. We have fulfilled our needs, whether they are personal or business, whether they are current or future. So this is like a formula, that if we are able to put aside some money which is the need of our current times and our future times, then whatever remains or whatever comes after this particular chunk should be perhaps saved for humanity. It should be saved for people who are around us. And of course, we need to look around us. People are in so much distress. People are in so much problem. People are in so much stress, that unless we have that eye for them, unless we reach out to them, unless we think that we are answerable to God for them, we would not be able to have that urge to help people, to come forward, to sacrifice, to earn for other people. As you usually discuss that at times we have to save for charity. But because many a time there are situations in which this charitable cause comes before us and we have nothing to do. So we must save for charity. We save for so many things. We save for our future. We save for our children. We save for a rainy day. But let us also save for charity, because we should be in a position that whenever a person comes, he is able to be someone who receives something from us instead of we politely refusing him. And we also need to realize, viewers, that spending in the cause of God is in fact nothing but our real investment. Whatever we spend our own selves, of course, we spend on our needs. But whatever we spend on others is going to come back to us manifold. It's going to come back to us manifold, and we would not be even able to imagine the amount that we have in return. And as the Prophet Jesus has very rightly said, that store your money with God, because wherever your money is, your heart is. So if we store our money with God, our heart will be with God. And this is something which is a beautiful piece of advice which the Prophet Jesus has given us. And I think that this is something which is common to humanity. It's such an overwhelming emotion. It's such a moving emotion that when we care about others, we get that spiritual fulfillment. We get that spiritual enhancement in us, which is called tazkiyah in the terms of the Quran. We feel elevated. We feel that we've done something for others. And when we do something for others, of course, as I said, helping out others is going to earn us. But the most beneficiary of this act is ourselves, because we cleanse ourselves, because we are able to put ourselves in the shoes of the person who is oppressed and the person who is in this bother, in this spot of bother, and we empathize with him, we sympathize with him. And remember, we must not think that this is a favor that we are doing to such a person. No, it's not. It's a favor, in fact, that we are doing to our own selves. It's not a favor to other people, it's a favor to our own selves. And thus we need to understand that whenever we get this chance of being charitable, whenever we get this chance of showing charity, is a very, very blessed thing. And the second thing which this hadith also talks about, also needs our attention, and that is that a person فَسَلَّطَهُ اللَّهُ عَلَى حَلَكَتِهِ فِي الْحَقِّ وَرَجُلٌ آتَاهُ اللَّهُ حِكْمَةً فَهُوَ يَقْضِي بِهَا وَيُعَلِّمُهَا. which means a person who has been given wisdom, who is given this sagacity by the Almighty, and he uses his wisdom to solve problems of people and also teaches them. So the words of this hadith are فَهُوَ يُعَلِّمُهَا, and then before that it says فَهُوَ يَقْزِي بِهَا. So the person who has wisdom and he uses this wisdom to solve the problems of people and he teaches this wisdom to them is a person who is enviable. And I think these are so moving words, so beautifully expressed in the sublime Arabic of the Prophet's times, that they really tell us that if there is to be any envy, then it has to be for people who use this wisdom to solve the problems of people. And viewers, we also need to gauge this fact that there are many places in the Quran which tell us that if we have to be wise, if we have to be sagacious, then the key to wisdom is patience. So you cannot get to wisdom unless we have this patience in us, unless we stop ourselves, unless we discipline ourselves, unless we tell ourselves that we have to have this self-control. It is this self-control which actually makes us view other people. It gives us this break. It gives us this break in our reaction time, which makes us more wiser than before. So we have to understand that if we have to be wise, then the key to wisdom, or the rung or the ladder to wisdom, is patience. The more patient we are, the more wise we would be naturally, because as I said, that wisdom requires patience, it requires reflection, it requires deep thought, and this cannot come if we are spontaneous, if we are impulsive. So in order to counter this impulsive attitude, we have to stop ourselves. We have to take a back seat at times and try to find out the truth. Because now let us come to the third part of our study circle, and that is a Bible verse that we're going to study. This Bible verse is actually from the book of Deuteronomy, and it is verse 17, and it says that be upright in judging the cause of the man from a strange country and of him who has no father. Do not take a widow's clothing on account of a debt, but keep in mind that you were a servant in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God made you free, for this is why I give you orders to do this. So actually you can see how wisely the Prophet Moses is instructing us through this particular passage. And it says that you have to be upright in judging people. We must not think that if something is going against our benefit, then we must show a particular bias. In fact, the pinnacle of justice, which has been pointed out by the Quran, is that we have to be just with our enemies as well. La yajrimannakum shana'anu qawmin ala alla ta'dilu. That the enmity of our enemies must not stop us from being just to them. Ala alla ta'dilu. Edilu huwa aqrabu lit-taqwa. Show justice, be just to them, because this is closer to piety. So viewers, you can see that how the Quran stresses and similarly the Old Testament, they are both from the same God, and the way they express these universal truths is so refreshing, and we find the same truths being expressed over and over again in various scriptures. So be upright in judging the cause of the man from a strange country. Of course, this means he's an alien. He does not belong to our own country. So we have to be just with them. And of him who has no father, he's an orphan. So in fact, what the Prophet Moses is stressing here is that the weak elements of our society, they have to be shown special concern, special sympathy, and we have to be just towards such people. So to be just to a person who is a stranger to us, to be just to a person who is orphan, is something which is a great virtue. And it says further down, it says, do not take a widow's clothing on account of a debt. So if a widow is not being able to return her debt, and she has nothing else to give except her clothes, then show mercy to her. Of course, she is in distress, she is in a spot of bother, and if she's not being able to return the money, and the only thing that she can do in return is to give her clothes, the Prophet Moses advises people that don't take away her clothes. And he goes on to say, but keep in mind that you were a servant in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God made you free. So this is how actually the Almighty is being reminded. The prophet Moses is reminding people of the fact that they were slaves in Egypt. The Israelites, they were slaves in Egypt, and after they were actually they migrated from Egypt, or they were able to give a chance. They were given a chance to come out of Egypt through the prophet Moses, of course. This is something which gave them freedom, and when it gave them freedom, it was the Lord who gave this freedom to them. And it says that, and the Lord your God made you free. For this is why I give you orders to do this. So it's like saying that the Almighty blessed you with this freedom. And when He has blessed you with this freedom, you have to realize that you must not keep other people in this bonded labor, in this spot of bother, for example, by being unjust to them. For example, by being unjust to people who are weak, like orphans and widows and other elements of the society, and people who are not able to return their debts. So it's a beautiful advice, dear viewers, and I do hope that we should keep this in mind always, that being just, being compassionate, being considerate is something which is the common factor in all religions of the world. And allow me to say that even people who do not believe in any religion, people who are atheists, they are Gnostics, even to them, compassion and justice and all these universal human values hold strong. It's not just people who are believers in God. So such is this all-embracing nature of human values, that every single person on this planet Earth, he acknowledges or she acknowledges that whatever is universally understood is something that we find it akin to our own nature, so close to our nature. We find that justice and kindness and sympathy and contentment and selflessness, these are strong human values. They bond us together. They make us care for each other. They make us realize that we have to be people who are always upright in our dealing. And we must also understand that at times being just entails that we suffer. So look what the Quran says. It says that we have to be just, even law ala anfusikum awil walidain wal aqrabin. So we have to be just to people even if it goes against our own interest, even if it is something which infringes upon the interests of our parents and of our relatives. We must not let go justice, because justice is the representative of God on this earth. To be just is something that which is God's attribute, and we just cannot let go of justice. We just cannot think that if this is something through which we will suffer, so therefore let's make a compromise. No, justice is something we know that it was upheld by all righteous individuals, and we just need to take a look at our history books and find out there were so many examples of history that we can in fact cite. Our own Prophet Muhammad was called the Just. He was Sadiq and Amin. He was the truthful person. He was a person who could be entrusted with various things. So he was something who was called a person who was always he was always prone to justice. And we do know that there was this instance in his own lifetime when someone stole something, and in fact her name was Fatima, and it was suggested that she should be forgiven, and someone did tell the Prophet that if she could be forgiven, then this would be good. But the Prophet, look what the Prophet said. He said, if Fatima bint Muhammad, even if Fatima, Muhammad's daughter, would have done this wrong thing, I would have punished her. So this is what we call universal application of law, non-selective application of law. This is like everyone being equal in the eyes of law, every single person submitting to the eyes of law, to the rule of law. And this is something that we must take strong adherence to, because justice is I would say, as Socrates has pointed out centuries ago, it's the queen of all virtues. It is in fact the queen of all virtues. The more just we are, the more upright we are. The more just we are, the more fair we are. The more respected we are, the more I would say that people who are just, they have they may be blunt, they may be people who have a strong overtone, but they are respected because they are just not only to other people, but to every single relative or every single acquaintance which might get hurt, who might get hurt if we show this, or if we raise this voice of justice. So, dear viewers, with this, we come to an end to this third part of our study circle. And as I said, that we have today discussed a Quranic verse which tells us that the prayer wards off evil and vulgarity. So let us make our prayers stronger. Let us use our prayers to become better individuals. And remember that all these worship rituals, they are not an end. They are actually a means to an end. And that means is to become a better individual. So if our prayer is actually warding off evil, if it is warding off lewdness and vulgarity, and we do feel this shame when we do something bad, it does mean that the prayer is working. And if there is something wrong with it, then we do need to rectify the situation, because it does mean that the prayer is not doing what it is meant to do. And we have also discussed this hadith of the Prophet, which says that the only two people which can be envied, which can be jealous of, are people who have been given wisdom and they use this wisdom and teach this wisdom for the cause of people, and people who have been given wealth and they spend this wealth in charity for people. And finally, we discussed this Bible verse, verse 17, chapter 24 of the book of Deuteronomy in the Old Testament, in which the Prophet Moses has specifically guided us and advised us that we have to be just, we have to be upright, and we must not be harsh, particularly to weak elements of the society. So viewers, I'm going to open your mics. If you have any question to what we have just discussed, please, I'm just going to unmute your mics, and after that, inshallah, we'll proceed. So I can see Rafia Khwaja. I'm just going to unmute your mic and you can proceed with your question. It's self-muted, Rafia Khwaja. Kindly, would you please unmute your mic? Yes, please proceed now.
I was reading Surah 2, and in that there was the story of Hazrat Aisha when she was left behind after the caravan left.
Mm-hmm.
What I didn't quite follow in the footnotes was that her family and the Prophet ﷺ did not believe that she was innocent, and she was questioned by them, and she was my judge.
Well, I have only been partly able to hear your question.
I'm not really sure if I had read it correctly, that the Prophet ﷺ and her parents did not believe her, and he questioned her, and she kept quiet, and she said, God will be my judge, and I'm innocent. I'm not very sure if I understood it correctly, or I said it was in the footnote. So would you be able to explain what was about?
So you see, there was this atmosphere of, I would say, blame which had been created, and Aisha radhiyallahu anha was implicated by people, and they started actually manipulating the personal life of the Prophet as well. So, and the situation had become so murky that if the Prophet had tried to sort of solve it or dissolve it, it would have cast more mud, and it would have made it more murky and more problematic. So the Prophet chose to keep quiet, and he let the situation develop in which the Almighty was able to then send down a verse. And you see what the Quran has said, La tahsabuhu sharrul lakum, bal huwa khairul lakum. So you see, at times the Almighty lets these happenings go about, which are very stressful, and we cannot even imagine their tenacity. You see, just imagine that a person of the caliber of the Prophet suffering from the fact that one of his wives is being blamed, accused of adultery. This could be nothing more stressful. And look what the Quran says, La tahsabuhu sharrul lakum bal huwa khairul lakum. Don't think that this is going to be evil for you. It's going to bring good to you. And what particular good did it bring? it says that these particular instances actually tell you and make you aware of your foes and your enemies, because people who at this time when you are in a spot of bother, they make it a point to indulge in hearsay, they gossip and they chat about. This is how people get to know that who my real enemy is and who my real friend is. So the hypocrites in the times of the Prophet were actually exposed through this event. And then this event also became instrumental, as we know that this was revealed, this particular surah, Surah Nur, in which this event has been narrated, the event of Ifk, which means accusation. This actually surah became instrumental in sending down so many directives from the Almighty regarding our social lives, which included this, that if someone has cast a buhtan, a wrong blame on people, then how should we behave? So the Almighty said, Subhanaka haza buhtanun azim. That why didn't people actually say that this is a blame, it's a false accusation which is being worked up by people. So you see, the Prophet kept quiet. He could have solved the situation, but because of the fact that there was so much at stake, and because of the fact that the Almighty also wanted to expose his enemies, that he let this happen and let the Almighty take charge of the situation. And I do understand, I think we all should as well, that this should have been one of the most painful instances and painful times of the life of the Prophet, that it was, I think, weeks in which this thing went on until the Almighty himself revealed verses in the Quran which absolved Aisha radhiyallahu anha from this false accusation. So this was the hikmah, I do gather, which was there, and we can also learn from this that at times things are so bad, but in the planning of the Almighty, in the grand scheme of the Almighty, there is something hidden, there is something there which is meant to be in our own favor, and we have to be patient in that and trust God.
But Dr. Shehzad, did the Prophet ask his wife that if you have done something wrong, you can say so and you can ask God to forgive you?
Well, I'm not aware of any such thing, and this could have happened, and this could have been there. But as I said, we have to look at the bigger picture. That as far as the Prophet is concerned, he might have maybe for some days or maybe some moments he could have been in this situation. But I think that the stature of the Prophet is such that he would never have believed that this thing could have gone on, and he must have discussed it with Aisha, and it would have perhaps been something which he would have already known. But the fact is that he did not clarify the situation to all other Muslims because I think that for the wider good, and perhaps because the Almighty had stopped him as well, that this is something that I'm going to take charge of and resolve myself. So we will now continue with our the last part of our study circle, and this is some topic which we discuss regarding Muslim or human on the human plane, in which we have to become better individuals, or perhaps at times we need to realize that these things are which are worthy of our own attention. At times it could be a misconception, at times it could be a misinformation. So today what we are going to discuss specifically is how the importance of rule of law is, and how we have to respect the rule of law. So this is something which is often also a cause of misconception, that people think that if there is a law of the land and there is a law of the Sharia, and if the two of them clash, and we are living in a place in which this discrepancy arises, this problem arises, then we must break the law because Sharia is superior to the law of the land. So this clarification I wanted to make here is that as far as the Sharia is concerned, it itself tells us that the law of the land has to be respected. It must be respected at all cost. The more we do respect it, the more we are going to follow the Sharia. So it's like telling us that it's not just the Sharia. The Sharia itself tells us that the law of the land has equal sanctity. It has a lot of respect that we must offer to it, and also tells us that if there is a clash between the two, then of course we should perhaps refuse to follow some directive. But in that case, that will be a situation of persecution that we would be facing. And instead of breaking the law, I mean, instead of revolting against the law, it's much better at times to negotiate with the authorities that this is a case of persecution. And if all said and done, if this does not get solved, then the best way to avoid such clashes is to either migrate from that place or to suffer that persecution. Because if we suffer that persecution, the Almighty hopefully will forgive us for what we are not able to do. And at the same time, if we are able to migrate from that place, if possible, then that should be done. But adopting an attitude which is full of vengeance, maybe, or which smacks of vandalism, that is not on. So we might suffer for breaking the law. For example, we know that Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali, when he was told to fight in Vietnam, he refused on human reasons. And we know that he was stripped of his title, and he chose to be to do so because he thought that he chose to be persecuted, but he did not do something wrong. So I would say that at times we have to make the sacrifice, but at other times we also need to realize that there are things which we must first understand that whether they are actually violation of law as well or not. So just to give you one example of the United States, we know that polygamy is forbidden here. Now, polygamy is not something which is obligatory in Islam. So this should not become an example of violating the law. For example, when we are asked to marry one, and we are also given this option that a person can marry more than one wife, this is just an option. It's not an obligation. It's not a farz. It's not mandatory upon us. So if Muslims think that they can marry more than one wife, and when they are stopped in the United States that they cannot do so, and they do, then they also indulge in it by having a secret marriage and not registering it, and then thinking that they're doing the right thing. This is something of a grave misconception, because as I said, you can refuse the law when something of the nature of an obligation is is hindered upon you, is impeded for you to follow. But what if something which is an option for you, and that you're made to follow exactly like that, and still you think that it's going against the law of the land? This is not on, and this is not the right example. So marrying because simply the United States does not allow you to marry more than one wife, and your religion does, it's an entirely different thing. As I said, such things, when there is a clash of the law has to do something of the nature of obligation. It is only then that we have to do something which we think that is our obligation, and we are being stopped from following that obligation, from following that responsibility, that we negotiate or we migrate or we suffer persecution. However, things which are optional in themselves never warrant that we should violate them. Another example of this is cousin marriage. We know that in the United States and in many other countries, cousin marriages is forbidden in most parts. And here again, Muslims think that since cousin marriage is something which is allowed by their religion, so therefore they make it a point to think that if they marry between their cousins, they would not be doing something wrong. Again, I would say that this is something that needs to be considered once again, because like in the previous example, cousin marriage is not an obligation, it's an option. So if that option is producing some ill effects, or if that option is producing some problems, and there is a law which says that we should not marry among cousins, again, this cannot be presented as an example that we are breaking Islamic rules, because we are not. The Islamic rule is not that we have to marry come what may a cousin. No, that's not the case. The rule is that we can marry a cousin if we want to. So here again, we need to realize that the law of the land, it holds tremendous importance. The law of the land must be followed. It's not the rule of jungle that we live in. And I do unfortunately see so many violations occurring in the name of religion, and people justifying them because they think that this is something what their religion has told them. And they forget that their religion has also told them that they enter in a bond in a covenant, in a promise between various people. And when they talk about breaking that bond, they don't realize that they are breaking this covenant, this treaty of citizenship, which they made with their mother country or the country of their residence. So this is another thing that we have to realize, that hoodwinking the law, breaking the law, or acting against the spirit of the law wherever we live is totally forbidden. And if we think that there is a clash between our religion and the law of the land, then we have to work out either a compromise or migrate from that land. But we cannot or we should not violate the law. We perhaps might suffer persecution. We can suffer court martial, as I gave you this example in some of the cases. But then we cannot be people who go and infringe upon the law, because the law is superior. And we have to realize that as human beings, as Muslims, as individuals, living in a place where there are laws, they are meant to be followed. Not only followed, they have to be followed in letter and spirit. When we say letter and spirit, it means that we cannot bypass the law. We have to go with the spirit of the law as well. So marrying cousins, or for example migrating to areas in which we can hoodwink the law, is something which is totally uncalled for. So viewers, with these words, I do come to an end to this fourth session as well. And I will now open your mics. So please let me know if you have any questions in this final session, and then we can discuss them. Okay, I can open the mic of Yasin Fahad. Yes, please go ahead. Wa alaikum assalam.
I just wanted to know, you mentioned a few months ago that there is an introduction to a Quran that's being published in English that we can give to non-Muslims.
Right.
I was just wondering if it has been done yet.
Yes, it has been published. Actually, this publishing has two steps. It has been published in our monthly English journal. You can see it online. And as far as its hard copy is concerned, right now it is in the press, I'm told. And hopefully it should be published in this week or so, because it has gone to the press. And as long as it is there, we do know that it does take a little time, but it's on its way. But if you want to read it online, it's available at our journal and also at our websites.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So viewers, it seems that we do not have any further questions. So let's end our study circle here. Thank you very much for being with us, and have a nice weekend, inshallah. Hope to see you all next Saturday at the same time. Khuda Hafiz.